What's up YouTube? Hope you're all having a fantastic day today. I'm going to hopefully be sharing some potential news here on Final Fantasy XVI. Yes, you heard me, Final Fantasy XVI. That's the Final Fantasy game that possibly doesn't even exist. If it does, Square Enix have never, to my knowledge, acknowledged it publicly. So, could be completely way off base here, but I think we've got enough to go on now to suggest that yes, Final Fantasy XVI is in the works, it is being developed. It is going to be released on the upcoming generation of consoles. So, for example, the PS5, whenever that gets released. Probably going to be hearing more about that later this year. And if it isn't in the works, then Square, what are you playing at? Final Fantasy XV is still the final entry in the franchise, at least the numbered entries. And I know that Square have all their spin-off projects of Final Fantasy, which is evidence that they definitely still believe in the franchise. Obviously, we've got Final Fantasy VII in the works, the remake of Final Fantasy VII rather. But in terms of a brand new IP, a brand new entry, numbered entry in that particular series, so far we have heard absolutely squat. And with Final Fantasy XV pushing on to about 3 years old now, it's time, I think, that we heard something. Now, as I'm sure many of you know, Final Fantasy XV still had a whole host of new DLCs and expansions in the works, which up until last year a lot of people were looking forward to. Then Square decided to cancel all of those. Well, not all of them. We did get episode Ardyn, which was released just recently, but apart from that, they cancelled the rest of those episodes and DLC that a lot of people were excited for. And a lot of people said, Square, we really hope that you've got a fantastic reason for wanting to do that. And they responded at the time, this was still last year, with, well, Luminous Productions, which were developing Final Fantasy XV and its expansion content, now need to move on to other projects, a new AAA project, since that was specifically the intent of that particular development team. Well, it turns out that that is exactly the case, because we've got this dude here that's currently leading up Luminous Productions, Takesha Terada. He's the director, anyway, of the DLC for Final Fantasy XV. And he says, and I quote, "The team that created Final Fantasy XV wants to create a new AAA title that is not an existing IP. That's why Luminous Productions was born," he goes on to say. And then he continues, "I cannot talk about the details, naturally, but like Final Fantasy XV, I will create a game based on a new world." So, obviously not based on one of the previous Final Fantasy games, drawn with high quality, high end. Please be assured that this next project is already in motion. So whatever it is that Luminous Productions want to work on, they already are working on it. And this is the reason, as far as we know, that the rest of the DLC for Final Fantasy XV was cancelled. Now, it could be that Luminous Productions are working on a brand new IP that has nothing to do with Final Fantasy. If that's the case, as far as I'm aware, there are no development teams left in Square Enix that could be working on Final Fantasy XVI. And are they really going to let the franchise finish on Final Fantasy XV outside of their other side projects that are based on their previous numbered entries? I don't think so. I cannot believe that's going to be the case. Square are a little bit smarter than that, and they know that one of the best ways to keep Final Fantasy alive, as has been proven throughout the last 30 years of the franchise, is to be releasing new games based on new IPs within that franchise. New characters, new stories, etc, etc. So this, as far as I'm concerned, almost has to be Final Fantasy XVI that is being developed by Luminous Productions. Now, assuming that is the case, and it may not be, but let's for one moment assume that that is the case, that Luminous Productions are working on Final Fantasy XVI, I really want to know, what do you think about that? Based on what they gave us with Final Fantasy XV, how do you feel about them heading up the next main entry, the flagship entry of Final Fantasy? And as I mentioned, this is going to be released, whatever this game is, whether it's Final Fantasy or something else, it is going to be released not on the current generation, but the next generation. So PS5 and perhaps whatever the next Xbox is going to be. We don't know much about either of those as of yet. And what would you like to see in this new potential Final Fantasy? Would you like to see Final Fantasy XV again, but with new characters, new settings, a new story? Or would you like them to change things up a lot? I'm pretty sure the way that Square are going with the Final Fantasy franchise, not only with Final Fantasy 15, but with what we've seen, and we haven't seen a lot of the Final Fantasy VII remake, we're going to be getting whatever Final Fantasy 16 is going to be, some kind of action, combat orientated game. As far as I can tell, that's simply the direction that Square are going to now. They're not going to be going back to any of the turn-based Final Fantasy games that we saw of the past. I know many of you, including myself, love those particular entries, but Square have said multiple times now that they are, in their own sense, relics of the past, and gaming has evolved. So, in that context, what do you hope from Final Fantasy 16? Perhaps something like Kingdom Hearts 3, but obviously far more Final Fantasy-ish than that game ended up being. Or would you like to see something completely and utterly different as the series continues to go forward? And do you think that Final Fantasy XVI will be released in stages, as it has been suggested that Final Fantasy VII is going to be, since that game is apparently coming out over multiple episodes? Or do you want one large game such as we got with the previous entry, number 15? So just to clarify, this is what we know with certainty. Luminous Productions, which were the development team behind Final Fantasy XV, have now scrapped any future development on Final Fantasy XV. We knew that from last year, but what we now know with certainty as well is that they are working for Square Enix on a brand new AAA game. Again, to me, this makes absolute sense that it will be the upcoming Final Fantasy 16, which, okay, we haven't had announced at all, but if they're not working on it, then I don't know any other development teams in Square Enix that could be. And I, as I mentioned, cannot see Square just letting that franchise die a death. Personally, I just want them to make something that the fans actually want. I want them to dedicate the game to the fans, not just try and focus on sales numbers, which of course they're obviously going to do anyway, but actually make a game that Final Fantasy players want to play, not just some AAA generic game that has the Final Fantasy name tagged onto it. I'm sure Square wouldn't do that, but as you know, game developers seem to be getting more and more caught up these days in investors and what have you. Sometimes as they do that, they can just forget about the gamers that really brought them the success that they've experienced. But yeah, please do share your thoughts. Thanks for stopping by today. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.